To put it simply, the metaverse is a new term for something that's been around for a few decades. A metaverse is a digital world that users can inhabit, usually in the form of a virtual representation of themselves, aka an avatar, and interact with other users or interact with objects or engage in activities. The metaverse is the environment we're immersed in a virtual reality experience. It's also called a virtual world. It's also called immersive media. And in my class at Brown, we start the semester by reading depictions of virtual worlds from science fiction, where the metaverse was first described in a short story called Pygmalion's Spectacles from 1935. So it's a new name, kind of old technology. The metaverse is a virtual world. But the applications of virtual worlds that excite me the most are the use cases where we can use virtual worlds, this very, very creative, very innovative technology, to help people.
For sure, the value is experiential learning and engagement, because one of the biggest challenges in healthcare today is helping people master the skills they need to manage very complicated chronic diseases. And our traditional way of doing that has been often didactic, episodic, classroom type learning, where people they get knowledge, but they really don't know how to put it into action. So I feel that the immersive learning environment allows people also to experiment with the behavior change that they're trying to achieve. For many of our patients, they haven't really exercised or tried different types of activities in their lifetime, and it's very intimidating. There's a lot of stigma. So the virtual world allows people, it lowers the friction really of engaging both in social and group support, but also in experimenting with health behavior change.
I think that the promise of these virtual worlds for us at the university is an ability to be able to teach and assess complex skills at a greater scale. And so, for example, in Synapse VR, we took abstract knowledge that required a lot of background information in biology, chemistry, and brought it to life for our learners in a way that we couldn't accomplish in the physical classroom.
Creating a virtual world enables you to start designing an experience from scratch. In our case, it really allowed us to be intentional and thoughtful about every detail that went into the experience. And so what we did in the design process that hasn't really been possible in traditional training approaches is to engage with a wide range of experts every step of the way. That is across VR, behavioral science, learning design, law enforcement, civil rights, the list goes on, because we're not experts in these issues, so we regularly sought the input of those experts.
The attachment to the avatar really mediates the interaction with others and with the environment, and so it becomes a really important focal point. And that really emerged out of a lot of research that originated at the Stanford Media Lab, Nick Yee and Jeremy Bailenson, which was the Proteus effect, which is, it's a social science construct, a theoretical framework that basically says, what you do with your avatar, the experiences you have with your avatar in a virtual world translates to real world, or at least reflects your real world experiences.
Loosely categorize those as having to do with the environment and having to do with the characters. So when it comes to the environment, it was important to have detailed and realistic spaces that looked lived in rather than cold and generic. And to have immersive sound, which is much more important than photorealistic visuals. And then there's simple and seemingly obvious things like following the laws of physics. When you drop something, it falls down. That's not taken for granted in a virtual world. You could do unreasonable things or unexpected things, but figuring out what those laws are and sticking to them was really important. And then when it comes to characters, similarly, realistic appearance, movement and responses, making sure that the characters were not stereotyped in any way, and that they behaved in ways that were consistent with what officers had seen in the field.
It's a balance. Like there's some desire for realism and some desire for fantasy. And you have to balance them, because I think in our experience, if things were too unrealistic, it was hard for people to imagine themselves and take it seriously. But if it was too realistic, then it could be disruptive or distracting. So I think you really have to strike that balance. And you can't just take what you do in the real world and plop it into the virtual space. You have to know how to do that effectively in order to get the desired outcome.
We didn't want to replicate a textbook experience in this particular context. And so we adopted what is known as constructivism. It's a learning theory that engages problem solving, construction, movement, dynamic skill acquisition. We also incorporated self-regulated theory, where the learner in the task, in the experience, was invited in this self-reflection task. We needed to be contextualized not just in the experience itself, but also within their learning environment, their greater learning environment. And so we also incorporated co-regulated learning, where we designed the experience where a learner in the classroom could be guided by her colleague in that classroom. And it also offered the instructor the ability to wrap around an experience, a learning experience. And so we never anticipated that the experience would replace the role of the faculty. It was always designed in a way that it would augment what was not feasible in the physical classroom.
I just wanted to also agree about the comment about augmenting what we currently do and not really replacing, because I feel like in healthcare, patients have a 15 or 30-minute interaction with an educator or a physician or a nurse, and then they have to go home, and like 70% of a person's risk for a poor outcome is based on their own ability to master the regimen at home. And so we really feel that our experience extends the value of the time that people spend with their clinicians, by giving them support in the implementation space, which is their home, their work, where they play, so it's in this sense, technology isn't really replacing, but it's enhancing the value of the care that we already deliver. And I think we need relationships, real human relationships, just like educators and students, clinicians and clinical teams and the patients. They want those relationships, but we also need to, help people succeed with complex information and things they have to do day in and day out.
So for us, obviously efficacy is a big interest, learning efficacy and engagement. Given that virtual reality is new to the university, the implementation of knowing how to implement the experience both at our physical campus and our online global campus was also a priority. And so we engage in what we call feasibility research studies. And this gives us insight into the demand, right? How are our adult learners responding to VR compared to maybe more of our traditional age learners? Acceptability. Were people satisfied overall with the experience? How are instructors reacting to the experience? The implementation, how practical is it? And so how do we need to reconfigure the physical classroom in order to allow 20 students to engage in virtual reality at the same time?
We have a number of layers that go into how we've evaluated and how we expect training will continue to be evaluated going forward. So what we've focused on until now has been exploring if the experience can suspend disbelief and create a successful conversational interaction for training. And what we found at a high level is that it can. In fact, it surprised us how much officers were willing to suspend disbelief and engage and feel present and aspects, though, that we think about when we think longer term about the overall effectiveness of this as an instructional tool. And the first really gets back to what we were just talking about earlier about the relationship with the existing training program and especially the training instructor. So we intentionally built this to rely on the instructor who observes and evaluates performance against a set of learning objectives. And our goal is to provide them with data and tools like bookmarks and replay and a debriefing system that can help the instructor be as effective and consistent as possible. So we want to add to and enhance what the instructor can do rather than replace anything that's there. And then if you look even bigger when it comes to evaluating the overall effectiveness of trainer as a learning tool and on behavioral outcomes of officers when they're in the field, this is where our academic partners come in, since their goals are to evaluate that overall effectiveness and outcomes. Each of the partners, the 4 universities that I mentioned earlier, has their own approach and their own set of research questions. And so to me, that speaks to the variety of approaches that it takes to measure outcomes. The science around how to do this kind of analysis is still not established. There aren't clear best practices yet to evaluate the outcomes for these kinds of experiences. And so we're really excited to see what each of them is able to bring to the table with their research.
We designed comparative effectiveness research to really look at the real world impact and feasibility. We did feasibility testing, we did usability testing. We actually had to develop a new technology streaming option to scale the platform to make it possible for people to use on commonly found mobile devices. But our biggest outcome measures were engagement, because that's a big problem, and we want to know that people will participate in showing that we could do something that we do in real life just as good and get just as good outcomes. But also have some additional advantages as well, which is to help the person who doesn't learn well from a didactic approach, or to master skills that really require you to put that knowledge into action, which is the added advantage of immersive platform learning. So my favorite one is the avatar represents the change you're going to make in your life. That came, straight from one of our participants, and it just, to hear when we're in the program, we hear the Proteus effect come out. We're like a family. This is our avatar family. That really speaks to the experience of social connection that people feel, and you don't really see social connection unless you have that immersive presence. So I think those, I think there's a sense of feeling cared for, cared about, that you can cultivate that's different than something like we're in right now, like a Zoom. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a role for video in learning, but there's other ways that we can connect in a meaningful way that we should be offering to a broader audience.
And they better if they're aligned to strategic goals for an organization, more likely to be able to secure buy-in from leadership, get support, and to move forward with small bet experiments. We want to make sure that the immersive learning opportunities and that designers and developers are aware of the requirements coming from a more diverse learner population.
Bobby said about really making sure that VR is the right fit. It's not right for everything. What I've found is that VR is most apparently useful for training, especially in contexts where it's either hard or dangerous or expensive to replicate the kinds of environments or interactions that are required. So VR can make that more accessible and create a safe environment for learning. And again, similarly, defining your instructional goals, how you're going to approach validation, understanding your budget and your users and how they currently learn, to see whether VR could fit into their context and what VR might offer that would add to what's currently being done. Beyond that, I definitely would caution that developing VR experiences also requires really specialized expertise, ranging from environment and character design, UX design, motion and audio recording, speech processing in our case, game mechanics. So it's not something that just any developer could do. But if you do decide that VR is the right fit and you have those goals and you understand what's involved, then engaging with experts from a broad range of perspectives and planning to do a lot of testing, I think are two of the key things that go into making a successful experience.
You know, I think in healthcare, there's always a tension between, advancing our knowledge and research and translating that into real world practice. I think what I see is, still, even with a lot of research evidence, there's still not necessarily a large scale readiness to deploy something like a headset experience. I think that's one of the advantages of our virtual world, which is accessible in a tablet, a Chromebook, or a laptop. It's not immersive in the headset way. It's immersive in a 3D immersive world approach, which I think, because of our ability to use cloud streaming, we can deploy it to a large number of people in a device that feels more familiar. But that was a growth. We had to learn that through trial and error. And I think healthcare is still trying to figure out if this is the next step. But I really believe that the pandemic has changed healthcare into to a virtual experience, and we will be, and people will still want an experience, not just tools. So a lot of what we have, even telehealth, is a tool to do what we traditionally do in person. VR and immersive worlds is a shift, is a paradigm shift in how we deliver care, how people learn to take care of themselves, which I think will take a little bit more work and convincing. But the first step is to say, to do the comparative effectiveness work, can we do what we do in person as well in a virtual environment, like an immersive world?